So we're going to be working with charcoal, and charcoal is amazing because it can work as a kind of sculptural tool. You can do lots with it to remove it, add things. So this is a great kind of warm-up activity because it allows you to move the surface of the drawing around. It's not a fixed way of drawing. So you can use other things. If you don't have charcoal, or if you're in a space where it's a bit too messy, it could be that you use something like graphite or pencil, but it needs to be a really soft pencil or graphite to draw with. Or you could use something like soft pastels or even chalk. So if you've got any blackboard chalk or anything like that, then it could be that you work white on black. So it's all about using a really soft drawing tool. So like I said, it just allows you then that flexibility. So what I'm going to get you to do first is to use the wide length of your charcoal to draw with, and you're going to fill the whole paper with charcoal so that you've got this surface to work into. So when I paint, I create lots and lots of surfaces so that I can then carve into them, and they're not a fixed space. They're very much something that can change with time and that you can work into it, because once something's fixed in drawing, it then restricts your thinking and your ideas. So you're going to start off with the side of your charcoal, and you're going to fill as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So if you are using graphite, then you can just do exactly that with graphite. Again, using a nice wide edge so that you can fill it as quickly as possible. And you're not worrying about it being even, it's just getting rid of the white paper. Or if you were working on black, then you'd want to get rid of all of that white paper or that black paper, and it just gives you that nice sculptural surface to work into. Now, a good idea when you're doing this is to do it relatively silently. So if you're working with another artist, then I would suggest as you're doing it that you're just thinking about what's appearing on the surface of the paper. So not having a kind of general conversation, you're just thinking about those marks that are appearing, and you can give it a bit of a soften as well, just with your hands. So get that covered as much as you can. You might get some squeaky bits of charcoal. Some bits of charcoal are squeakier than others. And you're going to get that nicely covered. Now, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to use a rubber. If you can see, that is actually a rubber. It's just really well used. And you're going to use that as your drawing tool. So the first thing that I'm going to get you to do is not kind of overthinking it and worrying about it looking like anything. You're just going to draw a nice big shape. And then once you've drawn that big shape, I'm going to get you to draw another 2 shapes. So vary their scale. So make some big, some small. And they could be the same shape or they could be different shapes. Then what you're going to do is you're going to start playing with the widths of the lines that you've created. So it might be you'd like to play with using different rubbers as well. So it could be that this one's quite a nice hard one, and then this one's a bit softer. You can also cut them so that you've got more of a sharper edge to draw with. So think of it as your drawing tool. So I'm going to make some of these. I've got a bit of a wobbly easel today, so I'm just going to hold onto my board, and I'm going to make some of these lines thicker and some thinner. And as I said, it would be great if this could be done in silence. So you're just focusing on what's starting to appear on your paper, and you're not worrying or getting distracted by anything else. We're going to be thinking about whether things are done in silence or you're talking as you're doing them, because it does really affect your senses, because you're being influenced by other things around you. Whereas if you're just focusing on your drawing, then you're completely engrossed in that surface and in that mark making that you're doing. So I'm just making some of my lines thicker, and I'm not worrying at all about the order that I'm doing it in or how it's starting to look. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start working back in with my charcoal to make some of those areas more defined, because sometimes to make something look darker, you need to make what's next to it lighter, and vice versa. So you need to kind of strengthen that contrast for things to stand out more. So as you're working, if you've got other people in your working space, then it could be that you're starting to think about how things are starting to look. So are they in a space? Are they objects? And it'd be great if you could be thinking about just using just words almost to yourself of what things are looking like. So to me right now, this is starting to feel quite like space or something like that. It's partly the dark of the charcoal and the light of the shapes that appear in, but also the way they're composed on the paper is really starting to me to feel like it's quite a spacey composition that's appearing on the surface. So again, I'm just making those lights look even lighter by making what's next to them darker, and I'm just enjoying working into the surface. So there's absolutely no right or wrong with this. It's just about using your hands and using your two drawing tools, which is your charcoal and your rubber, to make things appear on the surface. So you're more of a sculptor in this activity. So with it in mind that actually this is starting to feel a little bit spacey, I'm going to start thinking about my shapes and how they sit on the surface. And I actually feel like this shape here is starting to almost look down and over these shapes. So I'm going to start exaggerating that even more by taking the charcoal right to the edge there and making my space even bigger. Because there's no set rules in drawing. It's all about how you use the materials and how you make them work. Everyone will use charcoal in a different way. So the way that I'm explaining it and using it today would be very, very different to another artist. Another artist might have a very set way of using it, which is really different. And it doesn't mean that either of us are right or wrong. It just means that we're using the drawing tool in a different way. So it's all about finding out how it works for you. But you also need to go with its properties. So charcoal is a material that is really soft. So it means that it works and goes across the surface of your drawing surface, whether that's paper or board, very quickly. So you need to go with it. If you're doing something that's really detailed, it's quite hard to get the charcoal to do that because it's something that is very soft. So if you are working in that way, firstly think about your scale, and then also think about the size of your drawing tool. So it's very hard to do something really detailed with something that's really chunky and got a really big edge to it. So if you need to do something detailed, then you need to maybe use something slightly smaller, like a charcoal pencil or a tiny tip of the charcoal stick. So I'm just starting to curve some of my shapes here, because I'm really enjoying the fact that it's feeling quite spacey. It's feeling like the air is moving, so everything's moving, so I'm really exaggerating that with my mark making. Everything feels like it's moving. If I was doing a really careful bit down here, then it maybe wouldn't have that same freedom and movement. So really think about your mark making with your thing. It might be that yours is actually just becoming more of a pattern, and that's absolutely fine as well. So I'm just grabbing another piece of charcoal, because you'll find working in this way, you'll get through quite a bit. So what I'm starting to do now is I'm just starting to pick out areas that I'm going to make darker and lighter. So you're thinking about the parts of your drawing that would be really dark. And again, if it's just a pattern, there's still going to be lights and darks in it to create that sense of depth and to give things movement, which is what we want to really celebrate with our use of charcoal today. So I'm using the dark to make this bit down here feel really dark. So I'm thinking of a planet and it's right underneath, and the light's maybe coming more from here. So I'm going to make the other areas really dark. So like I said, if it was just more of a pattern, then you're still identifying those darker areas to give things depth. So I'm really also playing with how I'm using the charcoal. So enjoy exploring how you can make different marks by putting different pressures on your charcoal. So if you're pressing down really hard, it achieves a much darker tone. If you're lighter, then it means that you've got more control. So play with the pressure, and also play with the fact that you have got a nice chunky edge to draw with, and maybe a flatter edge and something. I always find that my drawing tools become quite kind of pointed because I'm pressing down quite hard and working around. So really explore that, and at this stage it should really be nice and flexible still, so you haven't got anything set in stone and you're working across everything at the same time frame. Because if you find that you're doing something with lots and lots of detail and not giving the same attention to everything else, then that one area will start becoming slightly disjointed from the rest of the composition. So I'm going to make this area darker, and I'm also going to start thinking about, I think these are sort of planety type shapes, that's what they're feeling like. I'm also going to introduce I want that nice sense of movement, so I'm going to start introducing some maybe swirlier shapes that move around. So start thinking about how your shapes are connecting, and it might be that you need to introduce some new shapes or some new lines to start creating a relationship between the three shapes that are within your composition. So I'm just adding this line here to start creating a bit of a sense of movement. And again, to give something depth, then you need to make one part of it darker and one part of it lighter. So even as I'm stood here, you can see, the clues that tell you that I'm stood here is the light shining from here, or like my hand here, the clues that tell you that it's a hand is the light that's hitting certain areas. We don't have a definite outline around things. We're given visual clues through light. So I'm just using my hands at the moment to move that charcoal around. But like I said, you could be using chalk for this. You know, you could go and do it outside, any kind of, on a paved surface, you could be working in and taking bits out. Or it could be that you're working on some black paper and you're working in with some just white chalkboard chalk. You could be using a pencil, but a really soft one, so go for the higher B. So this is a 9B. So, and again, don't press down too hard too early so that you've got that movement and that flexibility. It's a bit like painting. If you went straight in with all the black paint, it'd be really difficult to then start introducing the lighter colours and things to come through. So keep things nice and flexible and light, and only start adding these really dark areas once you're feeling happy with your composition and what's appearing on the surface. And do be having those conversations, even if it is to yourself, about how things are starting to form. So whether they are objects, whether they are living things, whether they're moving things. So what's appearing on the surface. And I'm going to start working in a bit more with my rubber now to start moving the shapes off of the surface of the paper. So I'm just going to start giving this shape a little bit more identity by creating some more light and dark around it. And what's great about this, if you're not overly happy with something, is that you can just soften it again, just using your hand. So every now and then, whenever you're working on a big scale, a large scale, it's really good to stand back, because it's hard to see something when you're just looking at a part of it, to see how all of the parts connect. So make sure you're standing back and you're seeing how it's working as a whole, and it might be that you need to start identifying certain things that you'd like to stand out more. It might be that you need to add more contrast. And again, this doesn't have to be a composition that makes sense in terms of subject matter. It's more about it's making visual sense. So it's about the shapes working alongside one another and connecting to one another. So I'm just going to make these shapes a bit more defined, but I quite like the way that they're slightly in the distance. So I'm going to start highlighting that more by making what's closer to me lighter and what's further away darker. But you can do that whichever way around you like, but it's quite nice to start thinking about a sense of space. So even if this is a pattern, think about what shapes are closest to you. So what part of the pattern is a more raised surface and what's flatter, and start thinking about how you can start identifying that and defining that through your use of light. So using your rubber as a drawing tool is exactly the same as your charcoal or your pencil. You can press down hard or you can press lighter so that it's not as crisp. So I'd like you to start making some of those decisions on whether things are going to be really defined or whether they're going to be slightly softer. And that's another element that you need to be thinking about, is that if something is really focused, if you put your hand in front of your face, you'll see that you can see all the details, particularly mine at the moment with all the charcoal over it, but you can see all the lines of your hand and you can see it in lots of detail. If it moves further away, it becomes slightly less defined and you can't see as much detail, but you can still see it's a hand because of those clues, because of where the light's hitting and those simple shapes. So it's about identifying your light and dark, but also thinking about how you're creating depth through detail. So I'd like this big kind of moon type shape to be the closest thing. So I'm just going to start giving it a little bit of texture. But it might be, as I'm working into this, actually it doesn't really feel spacey anymore. It feels like a moving pattern or moving mechanical parts And it could be that actually it starts turning into that. I mean, as I'm looking at this now, it feels like this shape here is almost spinning. So I could start changing its identity into more of a spinning wheel, that actually these are the cogs that are springing off, and this is the movement that's around it. So, as I said, it's about keeping things flexible, because sometimes you're quite led by the material, and it's really important as an artist to go with that, so that you've not got a fixed idea too early on in your head of exactly what something's going to be. You're allowing yourself to move and develop your ideas as they're going along, because quite often the first idea you have isn't always your best idea. So it's good to let things evolve as you're working. So I'm just softening this, because actually I quite like my spinning wheelie shape. So I'm just going to exaggerate that even more by thinking about my contrast. And actually my space idea doesn't feel as important anymore. It feels more like things that are moving. We're almost looking inside of some machinery or something like that, and things are moving and exploding. I'm thinking about the noises that they might be making. They feel quite noisy. This doesn't feel like a quiet space, so I'm going to add to that idea by adding some of these marks that don't feel calm. They feel like there's something moving and going on. They feel quite loud. So I'm going to continue working into that. And then I'm then going to keep working in with my rubber to make those contrasts. So again, going back to that idea of making something really light by making something next to it really, really dark. So you can make those contrasts stand out even more. And if something was moving towards you, it wouldn't be the same tone all the way through. There'd be lights hitting it at different points. So I'm just starting to think of this with this. This is almost like a spring, I think, that's appearing. So I'm going to carry on enjoying working into my shapes. I'm thinking about the sounds. I'm thinking about the space. Everything, I'm thinking about the surface. I'm thinking like everything feels quite kind of shiny and sort of metallic. So I don't want things to have too much texture, so they don't feel too kind of furry. Or I'm just going to make that stand back a little bit so this stands out more, and just keep working in and really enjoying my shapes that are appearing on here. So it's about standing back and working out again those areas that you're going to make really detailed. And it's also important to come away from something and come back to it. So at this point, I'd really recommend having a conversation with who's ever near you to talk about your work. And it could be interesting to hear what they can see within the composition, because actually it might, quite often as artists, we work so instinctively, it can stop us actually seeing what's in front of us. So it's really good to use that tool of the kind of eyes of others to be able to see your work with a fresh perspective. So go away, have a think about your work, talk to others about your work, and then it's great to then revisit it. Make sure you photograph it along the way, but come back to it with nice fresh eyes, even if it's just popping out and getting some fresh air and coming back in again, but just so you see it in a fresh way. And I'm going to do the same with mine, and then I'm going to continue working into it. I'm going to continue disrupting those marks maybe that are already there. So it continues to evolve. I had one of these drawings that I was working on, and I kept working on it for about a year, and it was just many layers of something that just kept evolving and changing. And that's the great thing about working with something like charcoal, is that it allows you to sculpt on the surface. Nothing is set, everything is constantly changing and moving. So I'm going to also think about this shape here, because actually it feels like it's the same tone further away as it is close up. So I'm just going to make what's further away slightly darker. And I'm going to give it a bit of a sense of space there by just adding a bit more information around it. And then as it gets closer to us, it's getting lighter and lighter as it moves through the space. So enjoy, keep working into it. Make sure that it's not one set idea. It could be a composition of many ideas. But the wonderful thing about charcoal is that it does capture that sense of time. So embrace that. Keep working into it, walk away, photograph it, come back to it, and let it be constantly moving on the surface of your paper.